Phil, thank you very much for attending Gym Owners Workshop 2024. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. Your speech actually was really interesting. It was something you can kind of take into life as well as just your general business sense. Firstly, I just wanted to talk about technology and the role it plays. So what role does technology play in enhancing and sabotaging our productivity? How can we kind of find the balance with this?
It's understanding its application. This is a bit like I always talk about education in the same sense, is that when you look at education, there's kind of the formal element of education where we know this does this and this does this, but what does that ultimately mean for a coach at the end of it? A degree in sport and exercise science. I came out with all this incredible knowledge, but the application of that knowledge was the bit that I then needed to figure out. So when it comes to technology, it's akin to the same thing, is that we've got all this great technology, but it's the application of it. And if we understand the application, the correct application, so for example, when we look at AI, AI is hugely useful, but AI, people are using it in a lazy sense right now. They're utilising it to do things they can't be bothered to do, rather than using it as something that complements what they do and makes things more efficient. It's taking that preparation and that time to ask AI the right question. So I always say it's the iRobot analogy, which nobody will understand unless they're of a certain age. But there was a movie with Will Smith, with iRobot, and it came to the end of it, it was all about you have to ask the right questions. And I think technology it's all to do with application. It isn't something that's just there to be the lazy man's solution. It's got to be something that if you understand it, you understand its application, how to use it and utilise it properly, huge impact.
I mean, not to go on too much of a tangent then, I guess, actually, but is AI something that you're kind of starting to use and apply in business a little bit more, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple levels that we'll utilise it on. It's the sort of thing where we can collate a lot of data and a lot of information very, very quickly. So AI can be used to produce spreadsheets and collate ideas together and bring together a fundamental idea of something. So if we come out with a concept of something or something relatively new that we want to bring out, we can ask AI, for example, as to what would be the key headers based off the science that we understand, and it will give us the key headers which then we can expand on. But AI as a tool to do something, again, like I said, to do something you don't want to do is ridiculous, because then we lose the personal aspect to it, we lose the human element to it, which again, the human element is kind of what a lot of people carve their business out around, is that we always talk in personal training about what's the most personal thing about personal training. It's you, it's the coach, it's the the way that you handle people, the way that you talk to people, your soft skills, your ability to communicate, all these things that make you you. Ultimately, if you've got a client who doesn't enjoy being trained by you, it's not something you can necessarily train out of yourself. It's something that you just need to accept that maybe you're incompatible from a communication perspective.
Talking about kind of communication and also, I guess, productiveness and things of that nature, is kind of ADHD, these are all kind of buzzwords, I guess, but mental health, ADHD, kind of neurodiversity, are these any sort of things that you have any kind of understanding on?
We do a lot of work around the sleep and the nervous system, which was kind of what the topic was to some degree today. When we talk about the nervous system, levels of arousal are something that, particularly in the neurodivergent population, are something that they're ultimately trying to regulate. If you look at, and again, the slides that I brought up, I brought up a slide about optimal states of arousal, which when we look at somebody who takes, for example, a stimulant, it can either take them to an optimal state of arousal or it can take them beyond it, depending on what their sensitivity is or depending on what their nervous system capacity is at. So if you've got somebody who's highly stressed, got a bunch of financial issues, got a bunch of personal issues, something like a central nervous system stimulant has a massive magnified effect. Whereas somebody who's very chilled out, they've got no worries, they've got no concern, the central nervous system stimulant obviously has a slightly different effect. So what we've got to remember is that the effect of something on you is all relative to the situation that it's put into. So when we talk about neurodivergence, we're looking at this kind of window of tolerance. Fundamentally, that window that you've got with neurodivergence is very, very small, which means something, it could be noise, it could be light, it could be too many people around, it could be enough to send someone into that state of hyper-arousal. So yeah, it's definitely an area that we're interested in, we're exploring.
There's actually, they're starting to find out that there's a higher percentage of people in the UK that are actually, across the globe, that are actually neurodivergent and kind of have a higher level of ADHD. And one of the sort of main symptoms of that is unproductivity. What would your advice be for someone that's kind of struggling with unproductivity? They feel like they can't really break the cycle of that.
Ultimately, when we look at somebody who goes into a state of hyper-arousal, so hyper-arousal is almost like you feel super positive about everything, you're super productive, you almost overkill. You're working if you've seen something about Mary, it's a bit like when she's hoovering up.
Yeah.
And you go into that state of almost overload where everything's very fluent, everything's flowing and everything's great. But the problem is if you're at that heightened state of arousal, that is going to be followed by a dip, like a huge dip. And when you get into that huge dip, that's when the unproductivity kicks in. Instead of trying to look for these super highs to get us going and keep us super aroused, super in this state of, almost hyper productivity, what we've got to understand is that if we can keep ourselves in this middle ground, we might not be getting that hyper productivity, but we're getting a consistent level of high productivity. And it's this thing of, what are people doing in business to do that? Ultimately we end up with people with sleep problems because they overutilize central nervous system stimulants, caffeine probably being the most notable one, and they utilize caffeine to push themselves into a state of hyperarousal. And if you're in a state of hyperarousal, very negative about stuff, people then utilize caffeine again to try and get them out of that state and into either the middle ground or the upper ground. The problem you've got to remember is that if you put something into the upper ground akin to like blood glucose, if I want to eat something that's super high in sugar, you're going to get this state of loads of energy. But I've got to realise that that's going to be followed by a state of crash. And it's a bit like, if you get somebody who goes into diabetic shock, the instant thing that you've got to do is give them something high glycemic, high in sugar, that's going to get their blood glucose rapidly. The problem is if you then just leave it at that, they're going to crash again. So you've always got to follow that up with something that's going to put them into that middle ground, which is a stable blood glucose level, and normally that's just a combined meal, proteins, carbs, fats, just a normal meal. So you get them out of trouble using the sugar, and this is kind of what people do with caffeine. They get themselves out of trouble because they're tired or they're fatigued or they're in this really negative state. I always talk about it like it's people on your shoulders. Yeah. There's a positive voice and there's a negative voice, and the problem is when they drop into that state of hypoarousal, which is that drop following that hyperarousal, you get that voice on your shoulder going, no, you can't do this, very negative.
Finally, just generally for all gym owners, it's a question we've asked all our interviewees so far, just one sort of key takeaway, one key bit of advice that you think all gym owners should be aware of.
It's all well and good coming to conferences like this, but if you don't go away and apply anything. I've been I've been educating for 20 years now. I've seen people at seminars and events, and they come and it's all this information, but then they leave and do nothing with it and applied it, rather than just coming along, listening, just taking it all in, and then, and his business right now is flying. And I said, look, congratulations on your business, he's doing great. He goes, something? He goes, I just applied what you told me 10 years ago. He goes, but I just applied it 2 years ago. There's so much valuable information from events like these, but there's so many people who will step away and they'll have a notebook full of information that they then close, events done, get home, put it on the side, carry on with what they are used to or what they like, because that's the way we've always done it. But you'll still see gyms, and in 10 years the gyms that didn't move on it are going to go, I wish I'd listened. There's no point in asking for advice and then totally ignoring it.
No, I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much, Phil.
Very well.
That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much.